So, welcome to the panel on meditation. And our job is when you leave this panel today, you are going to feel so relaxed and so happy and so unstressed. And you're going to be filled with love and compassion. But we're going to start with a meditation. And Booker, would you please lead us?
I'd love to. Good afternoon, everyone. If everyone could just take a moment to pull away from the back of their chair and bring their seat to the edge of your seat. And placing your ankles underneath your knees so that your legs will be at a 90-degree angle. You got that? All right. Just take a moment to sort of wiggle back and forth a little bit. And then let's kind of rock forward and rock backwards. And then see if you can find our seat right in the center. Some of us are people who are always looking forward to things, so we tend to kind of look forward and move our whole bodies forward. And some of us are kind of hanging out and seeing what happens, so we sort of lean back. So we kind of want to be right here in this present moment, all right? So taking a moment to lift up your toes, spreading them as wide as you can. Feel free to take your shoes off if you need to. It's that kind of party. You can do that. Okay. And then just placing your toes down from the outer edge, moving to the inner edge of your foot. Bringing your weight onto your toes, lifting your heels up. Pressing your heels back down towards the ground. Maybe lifting your toes up again. And this time rolling from the inside to the outside edge of your foot. And so take a moment to bring your hands up. So fingertips just placing on top of your forehead. Then you're going to slide your hands back until your thumbs reach to your occiput, that little ledge in the back of your head. Does everyone have that? So you want your thumbs just underneath that ledge. They're just going to gently lift that ledge up. You're going to feel the crown of your head lifting up. And your chin is just going to come into alignment, so your chin will be in the same plane as your shoulders. And you can bring your hands back down to your lap. Then resting your eyes in whatever way feels best for you. So for some people, resting their eyes feels better if they have their eyes open, and in a way of sort of looking without truly seeing, so to have your eyes on a soft gaze. And for some people, maybe you would like to have your eyes looking down towards a spot on the ground. And for other people, it might feel better just to close your eyes altogether and just really sink into this moment. So again, just taking a moment to really notice your feet on the ground. Noticing the temperature of your feet. If they're touching the carpet, what that texture feels like. And then bring your attention up to your ankles, your calves. Maybe just gently flexing your calf muscles. Noticing the rounding of your knees and that space between your knees and your hips. Feeling yourself sitting deeply in your seat. So feeling your sits bones, maybe your upper thighs connecting to the ground, to the seat that you're sitting in. And then if you like, you can draw your hand to your belly. And as you breathe in, see if you can do a full belly breath where you're really pressing your belly in towards your hand. And then as you breathe out, feeling the belly slide away from your hand, belly button reaching back towards your spine. So again, breathing in, knowing that you're breathing in. And breathing out, knowing that you're breathing out. Resting your hands onto your lap. And just continue to notice your breath. Noticing if it's deep or if it's shallow. If there's a long inhalation or a shorter inhalation. So without judgment or trying to change it, just noticing exactly where your breath is right now in this moment. And then noticing that this breath is like this. And noticing how this breath is just like this. You may slowly begin to open up your eyes. And thank you so much for your practice.
Thank you, Booker. And wouldn't it nice to just be at work and having that beautiful voice of Booker say, and notice your breath is just like this all day. And we're going to look at 3 different points of view as to how people are using meditation within their work, dealing with suffering populations in supportive housing, to get a sense of what are some of the options for you. And then we'd love to have a conversation, either to answer your questions and also to hear your stories. Our presenters today are going to be Leslie Booker, Sasha Parmasad, and Daiken Nelson, and we'll hear a little bit more about each of them later. We're seeing a rapid rise in the in people turning to meditation in both their daily lives and it's more and more as the part of our professional lives. And particularly those of us working in supportive housing are dealing with very highly traumatized populations. And there's a phenomenon known as vicarious or transferred trauma, in which out of compassion, out of empathy, we actually take on the trauma of our clients. And this can be very, very debilitating. It actually turns out that there are 2 versions of this. Empathy is when you feel so deeply for somebody that you take on their pain and suffering, and it leads to very high levels of burnout and stress and trauma, like PSTD. There's another thing called compassion. And when you feel compassionate, you feel for somebody, but you don't take on their own pain and suffering. It's actually much more protective. And compassion actually leads us to do much more whole systems action. We know that trauma is very endemic in the populations that you are all dealing with. Many of them are coming from domestic violence, homelessness, violent and abusive families, violent and abusive childhood experiences. And one of the things we have learned is that a traumatic event does not get locked in the brain for the first 90 days. And so when we teach kids to meditate in schools or in community centers or in housing projects, kids who are living in very traumatized, high-stress environments, it actually helps them process. Just having that quiet, open space actually affects all those parts of the brain that we discussed, and it helps them thrive much more in traumatic environments. But what we've also found is that we, the people who are dealing either directly with traumatized populations, or we're dealing with our staff who are dealing with traumatized populations. Vicarious trauma infects organizations. It leads to very high levels of burnout and turnover and stress. And so the Garrison Institute, which is an organization I co-founded with my wife, has been doing a lot of work which we call caring for the caregivers. Every one of you, I bet you if I asked you about your budget, would tell me you don't have enough money to barely do the things that you need to do. How many people here have a meditation practice? So that's great. That's probably about a third of you. There's been a lot of advance in the neuroscience of meditation. Meditation basically breaks down into these categories. They actually affect different parts of the brain. You can begin to think of them as prescriptions. So there's focused attention meditation, where you're doing something like following your breath. And that actually activates the the prefrontal cortex. And what's interesting about that is that's the part of the brain where we do strategic planning and thinking. So if you want to have a good strategy meeting and move a bunch of potentially difficult people or just anxious people out of their emotional center and into where we can all strategically plan together, that's actually a very good meditation to set up that part of the brain. And interestingly, this left side is what it activates, and the right side is what it deactivates. So it deactivates a lot of emotional jangling. So there's mantra recitation, for example, TM is a great version of that. And that also affects the prefrontal cortex, but it actually deactivates different parts of the brain. So when we're thinking about a mantra, which is a repeated phrase, it actually provides, it has a lot of emotional balancing qualities. There is open monitoring meditation, which is more of an open space-like meditation, and there's loving kindness and compassion meditations. And loving kindness and compassion meditations, is anybody? I don't think we're going to speak about them today, or maybe we will, but they're really where you focus love and the meditation on love and some phrases about love for yourself and for others. And that happens to be a very, very useful technique. There is no money in the system to actually provide care for your employees. That's what we have discovered in almost every sector that we've looked at. And yet it's incredibly essential for their well-being. Here are people who are dedicating their lives and you dedicating your lives to helping those who so desperately need help. And yet you need help too. And just as we focus on issues like life safety and we focus on issues of making sure everybody's trained in first aid, we also need to begin to train people in self-aid. And what you're going to hear today are some wonderful techniques for self-aid. You already heard a little bit from Leslie Booker, but I'm now going to formally introduce Leslie Booker. She is an amazing facilitator, public speaker on many of these issues, yoga teacher and meditation teacher, and she's been doing yoga with incarcerated populations, particularly something called the Lineage Project, which we may hear some more about, and also Spirit Rock, an incredible meditation center on the West Coast. And we actually met in a discussion about how one can bring mindfulness to the issues of social justice. And one of the things that I hope you will think about is that mindfulness gives us a sense of the larger whole that we are part of. It actually enhances our systems thinking. And so as we think both about healing ourselves and healing the populations we're working with, we should also think about where are the leverage points to try and heal society. Oh, and tell us a story about the Lineage Project.
So often people always say, oh, wow, you teach yoga and meditation inside jails. That must be, so amazing. And they have this kind of this idea or this view of us like going in and teaching these young people how to be master yogis, about how to wrap their legs around their heads and how they can like sit for 20 minutes. And I always say it's not about that. What it's about is giving tools to these young people to alleviate their suffering. They're going to be in jail for a while, some of our kids, and so what can we do right now to help them get through that? When I first started about 9 years ago, I was working with a group of young women, and they were an incredibly violent group of young women. I was working with the first teenage serial killer. There were about 3 of my girls who had committed murder and who are actually still in prison today. And my partner and I decided that we were going to figure out how to create a Sangha out of these young women. We're going to make them love each other and really care for each other. So we've been doing a lot of Ujjayi breaths, so really focusing on the breath. In my lineage and in Insight, our main meditation is focusing on just watching the breath as we just practiced. And so one day we're sitting in our circle getting ready to start, and this young girl, Mariah, had left our circle. And we heard this really screeching, like primordial scream. And it was Mariah, and we didn't know what was going on. So she's screaming and she's crying, and everyone, the whole room just stops, because she's sort of the alpha female of the group. So the whole room just stops to see what's going on. And eventually Mariah makes it back into the circle, and she's hyperventilating at this point. Just like little screams are coming out, little shouts are coming out, but mainly it's hyperventilating and tears and shaking in her body. So she makes it back to the center of the circle where all the girls are set up. And my partner and I just sort of stood back. We wanted to see what was going to happen. And the girls start to practice Ujjayi breath, which is the sound of the ocean. So they surround her, and you start to hear this sound arise in the group. It was like... So just that one breath, you can kind of feel your body sink down, right? So imagining a group of 10 girls circled around one, and everyone's breath is coming together. And then eventually, one by one, they all begin to place hands on Mariah. And the whole energy of the room shifts. And when Mariah had discharged that in her body, because we also talk, so often we think that trauma has been trapped in the brain, but we're learning more and more that trauma is actually trapped in the body. So she shook, she cried, she screamed, she discharged all this out of her body. And then she was able to speak. Because so often when people have trauma stuck in their body, they're not able to articulate. That's called alexithymia, which means that you cannot articulate what's happening in your body or what's happening in your emotions. So when she discharged and was able to speak again, she let us know that she had been to court the day before and found out that she was serving a much longer sentence than she initially thought. And Mariah had a toddler at home at the time, and because she was going to be spending much longer in jail, her child was going to have to go into foster care. We don't know how these practices are going to show up for our kids. All we know is that we're offering them this gift that lives inside their bodies. And it's up to them to choose when and how. And they don't even know that they're using it sometimes because it's just something that's in their body. But it's so great for them to have this tool to reach to when they need it the most.
Just briefly tell us about how would someone, maybe inside New York, or how would people access, how could people get started with what you've learned?
Yeah. So he was asking where people can get started in that lineage and the Insight tradition. New York Insight is right here in the city, which is amazing. And New York Insight is located on 27th Street between Broadway and 6th Avenue. And New York Insight has beginner courses. They have courses in the middle of the day. They have weekend retreats. They have day-long. So there's so many different ways to access. There are also many different sitting groups. They have sitting groups for LGBTQI community. They have sitting groups for POCs, sitting groups for people who are in recovery. So it's really lovely. So whoever your people are, you can find a community to practice with.
So next we're going to have Sasha Parmasad, who is the Associate Director of the Women's Initiative and Transcendental Meditation and a teacher at the David Lynch Foundation. And David Lynch has been very, very generous in supporting the spread of transcendental meditation through schools and many communities in need. And she's been teaching TM to at-risk populations, survivors of domestic violence, family justice centers, veterans with PTSD, and we'll hear more about that.
So as Jonathan spoke a little bit about me, I am originally from Trinidad. I was born there, so I'm of Caribbean ancestry. And as you would probably know, I work with at-risk populations, a lot of them coming from the Caribbean, a lot of them undocumented. The community that I come from, trauma is not trauma, it's a way of life. And therefore, how does one escape life? How do you escape yourself? Is it a question of escape, or is it a question of healing that relationship with yourself? And this is something that, the world has been kind of, we've been trained to think giving means giving without having that resource to give from. Given. When does it end? In this technique, you're filling yourself up, so you're giving from fullness. When fullness gives from fullness, fullness remains. I'm going to go a little bit into some of the work that we've been doing with the Lynch Foundation. I'm really appreciative of the homeless community and the collaborations that we've had so far with good result because of the healing that we've been able to facilitate within this community. To speak a little bit about the work that we've done in concrete terms, we've offered transcendental meditation to the Jericho Homeless Project in the Bronx. We've also taught residents and staff at Genesis. It's a course that's taught in a very specific way over the course of 4 days. It's a simple mental technique that you do. It's practiced 20 minutes twice a day, sitting comfortably in an upright position with the eyes closed. So what does that look like? It looks like any one of you here sitting down, and you just close your eyes and you're comfortable. It's an evidence-based practice. So what does that mean? It's not a religion, it's not a faith. It has nothing to do with belief. You can be an atheist. You can be any religion and yet it works. Why is that? Because it allows the mind to settle down and experience its own nature as pure silence and stillness. Just as our mind is active, from the moment we get up in the morning, we have this stream of thinking, right? I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to come to this conference, I have to, get here on time, there's this whole to-do list. We've all experienced that. But inherent within the nature of our mind is also that ability to settle down. If you break your arm, you just put your arm in a cast, isn't it? You don't take any special medications, you put your arm in a cast, and then amazingly the bones come back together. You put your arm to rest, and that allows the healing of the body. Very simple. It's almost like if you're doing nothing. It's like breathing. The specific technique is taught over 4 days, so I won't be able to go into a demonstration of it with you, but I'll show some videos that kind of give a testimonial, direct, experiential perspective from students that I've taught, Michael and Phoenix, and we'll just start.
It's hard to believe that one single incident can alter your life so much that you don't know how to go for help. I had experienced a traumatic event in the military, and it was so traumatic that it took over my entire life without me realizing it.
There are times I talk to my friends and from the Marine Corps, and they say some stories, and I'm like, "You too?" Like, yeah, of course, me too. I was there. On the outside, they seem to be fine. They seem to be normal, but inside they're just like me, like not knowing what to do with emotions.
For years, I forgot about it, or I thought I forgot about it. But little things showed up, the fact that I couldn't hold a job down, that I drank, that I was doing drugs, that I cut. I mean, it was to the point where I could only take a shower if if I wedged a chair under a door. And I'm talking about in my own house. So I lived like this for 25 years, looking over my shoulder and just jumping at noises and not being able to be in a room with more than 2 or 3 males.
All I was seeing is this cloudiness of just anger, depression, and I would always see the bad side of everything, even on a good day.
I was actually at the VA, and I saw the sign, Transcendental Meditation.
I was skeptical, I'm like, So, reluctantly I went.
I said, let me sign up for it. So I signed up for it, and I was like, the day of, I said to myself, this is bullshit. It's not gonna work. And that very first day, it stopped. Like all those little chattery thoughts, ooh, you're worthless, you're not normal, ooh, you're crazy, ooh, they stopped. I mean, when I say stop, they stopped.
I was surprised. I felt like I could breathe, like I could think. It won't be this emotional roller coaster coming at you.
Afterwards, you don't want that drink. You don't want that chaos. You don't want that dysfunction anymore.
It brought me who I am, you know. I lost who I was throughout all of this because I never had time to really, you know, process everything.
I don't cut anymore. Since TM, the smile won't leave.
So you can access TM. There's the David Lynch Foundation online. There's tm.org. There are a couple of centers in the city that you can access TM through. Just Google search tm.org or davidlynchfoundation.org, because the David Lynch Foundation specializes in offering this for free to at-risk populations. If you're interested, I can give you more information. Thank you so much.
So, Daiken Nelson comes from a tradition that actually I've been involved in all these traditions, and but I began part of my path working with an amazing teacher named Bernie Glassman, who's a Zen teacher who started providing housing for homeless people and homeless people with AIDS in Yonkers, and jobs for people with AIDS. So, and he created something called the Zen Peacemaker Order, which is really committed to both to combining the thousands of year-old Zen tradition from Japan with the desperate needs of people in America today. It's an activist tradition, and Daiken was doing that while he was a social service worker, a social worker, and then moved on to create his own Sangha, and within that something called the Mandala Café, which amongst other things provides jobs for formerly homeless and maybe even currently homeless people.
So as Jonathan said, I went to grad school in a counselor education program, and for about a dozen years I was a social worker. And I worked with homeless. I worked at a homeless shelter, and I also worked at a drug and alcohol rehab center, and we had kind of the revolving door of folks who were coming through who were either homeless or kind of at risk for that. And so then at one point I started my meditation practice and kind of went off on that tangent and have been practicing for over half my life now. And I ordained New Year's Eve this year will be 20 years ago that I ordained as a priest. In our tradition, when a person kind of studies with a teacher and they are to the point where the teacher feels they can go out in the world and begin to teach on their own, then the person figures out what they want to be doing with that. So for a period of time, I literally kind of sat and just in meditation or just in openness to see what I wanted to do. And it just came to me that in order to be of service in the world and to do some good, I wanted to do something to help people. And also kind of given my social work background, and I've worked in restaurants since high school, and in our Zen tradition, when we go on retreat, there's a person who's in charge of the kitchen and has to feed like 50 people a day for 3 meals for 4 weeks kind of thing, and keep all that together. And I've done that many times. So I came upon this idea of creating culinary training for folks who have difficulty either finding or keeping a job. I've connected, I'm based mostly in Harlem, West Harlem and Central Harlem, but I've connected with DHS and a lot of other organizations. I've working with some other nonprofits as well as the city organizations, working with folks who are returning from incarceration, and also folks who are either currently or formerly homeless. And the idea being is to just give them a skill set so that they can walk into a place and be able to get a job. We also have a catering program, a catering business, which also hires folks with those challenges in order just to give folks a job. There was a teacher also in our tradition, he was also a student of Bernie's named Peter Matheson, who was an amazing writer and very involved in the environment and the Native American movements. And he said, Zen is called the religion before religion. And so it takes it back to just being present, to just being aware right now, and to just appreciate that, to be able to experience it, but then to have some gratitude that, wow, whatever conditions, all of the conditions from the past arose that we're sitting in this room, in this moment, and we're safe, and we're happy, and we're healthy, and we're out in the world doing things that are good for folks and hopefully are fulfilling for us. And so that's kind of the essence of our practice, is to take a step back from this mind that we have that picks and chooses and likes and dislikes and gets stuffed from the time we're from the time we're born with all these ideas of, oh, it's always like this, or it should be like this, or someone told me it should be like this. So the meditation practice allows us just to sit and take a pause from that and just experience what's happening now, and to realize that those are just ideas that somebody came up with. The sky is blue. Okay, so somebody came up with the word blue. It's just a word. It doesn't have any inherent meaning in and of itself. So we do the meditation to try to find that space of just simple being, and then we get up off the cushion and we go out in the world and do good and do good for others, and we benefit from that as well as others. Thank you for this opportunity.
So Daiken just said, and when we do good in the world, we benefit. There's an architect named Christopher Alexander who has a beautiful phrase. He says, making wholeness heals the maker. And that is really what this practice is about. All our work, all the work that you guys are doing in the world every day is truly trying to make wholeness in the world. And what you discover is if you can do it with a little space for yourself and awareness and compassion, making wholeness heals you as a maker. So we're going to end this part of the panel with another meditation from Daiken, and then we're going to move to questions and answers and discussion.
Okay. So assume the position that we did before. So when I do beginning instruction, I tend to focus basically on three things: the body, and then the breath, and then the thoughts that come up. So we find a way to arrange our bodies so that we're comfortable. So it doesn't have to be sitting on the floor on a cushion in full lotus. It can be sitting on a chair or the edge of the bed, or sitting in the subway car or in your car. So again, there's no right way to do that. So we find a way that we can be in a state of relaxation, but also aware. And again, so we focus on our body and we're present. And usually at the beginning of meditation, we encourage folks to keep their eyes open, because if we close them, it's easier to kind of drift off and grab onto a thought. And next thing we know, we're on our summer vacation, or the one we had last. But people find their own way. So it's also kind of tapping into one's awareness of oneself. And so some people start out with their eyes closed, and then they say, no, I want them open. And again, there's no right way to do this. And it's not some place, it's not some state that we get to. And if we don't get there, we're doing it wrong. So whatever is happening in the moment is our meditation. So many times on the cushion, I've had boredom meditation, where I'm sitting there going, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And that's just that moment. And so again, it's not wrong. I'm not being a bad Buddhist or not paying attention. It's just whatever's arising. So we are aware of all of that. So again, the most important thing is a straight back. And we find a way to sit so that our spine is straight. Our nose is kind of in line with our navel so that, as it was said, that we're not leaning forward or leaning back. And hands can either rest on the thighs or you can fold them in your lap. And again, you just find something that's comfortable, something that you can sustain for a while. And then we focus on the breath. So take a couple deep breaths. Just feel the breath and breathe in and out through your nose. And just feel the breath coming in, filling up your lungs, filling up your belly. The energy from that breath kind of permeating all through your body. And then just allow your body to find its own breathing rhythm. And we always come back to the breath. So we're just aware of the breath as it comes in and goes out. Just very simple, very natural. And then lastly, I focus on the thoughts. And one thing our brain does, and does very well, is generate thoughts. And so we're not trying to stop them. There was a 13th century Japanese Zen master who said, it's not thinking. So we're not like having a thought and then going through this sequence of thinking this thought, which leads to that thought, which leads to that thought. And he says it's not thinking. So we're not trying to shut the whole thing down and float around in this wonderful place of bliss, which we may find, and it's lovely, but that's not a goal. So he called it non-thinking. So just like the breathing, we don't really know when a breath begins and when it ends. It's somewhat seamless. So the same thing happens with our thoughts, and we focus on a thought as it arises, and we just note it. We don't have to react to it. We don't have to say, oh, I just thought about this, which means I go off on that tangent. And so a thought comes up, we take a breath, and we don't grab onto the thought, we don't push it away, we just allow it to be, and eventually it will, like a cloud, just shift. And then another breath, maybe another thought. And we're aware of the sounds around us, we're aware of our bodily sensations. And so we're not necessarily doing anything, we're just being, we're just breathing. We're just relaxed, we're aware. So come back to your breath. And you can open up your eyes if they're not already. Did anyone become enlightened? Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
I just have a question about establishing programs like this, thinking about establishing them within supportive housing. In the video, both participants mentioned that they were hesitant to participate because they thought, oh, this is maybe religious or weird, and I'm just wondering how you help people overcome those ideas about the practice to get them involved in these settings.
So I work with predominantly incarcerated. I've worked with all different kinds of vulnerable communities, from sex workers to people living with HIV/AIDS, with people who are experiencing homelessness. I've worked with the spectrum. And with working with kids, I always try to meet them where they're at. I never promise that this is going to be something that's going to save their lives, or they're going to feel so good or so relaxed, because that's simply not true. When we move into our practice, it can bring up a lot of stuff. And the practice helps to support them with whatever comes up. And so I'm very realistic. I never tell them it's going to be like, the end all. And I often relate it back to their direct lives. I always ask my kids, how many of you got triggered by somebody? They said something, they stepped on your shoe, you turned around and hit them, and next thing you know, someone's on the ground, you're in handcuffs, you're in jail, and you don't even remember what happened. And all of my kids are like, and so what would it be like to have a practice where you can stop to actually feel your triggers? Because they all know what their triggers are, right? But your triggers are actually something that is your body giving you information, it's giving you clues. So say, what if we have a practice that allows you to be able to really feel your triggers, to acknowledge them while they're happening, to take just a split moment to take these thoughts that are kind of jammed up like this, and to create a little bit more space. So instead of reacting to something, we take a moment just to respond to it, and how that can so quickly change their lives. And so I think it's just really important to really know your populations, what's happening in their lives, what they need support around, and then to really speak from it through that lens, and to work with an organization that is in alignment with the way that you want to work with your students. The reason why I love the way that I'm teaching is that it is trauma-informed. So we do a lot of work around being trauma-informed. It's a very embodied practice. And we don't rely on anything that you have to memorize or think about or have, like a little this or a little that. It's all about following the breath. And that's it. It's a really, really simple practice.
It's a really good question. One of the things that I would say in response is that there's so much research around TM. So there's a lot of peer-reviewed research that's been published in very acclaimed journals, and the research shows that the reduced symptoms of anxiety and stress, reduced PTSD, symptoms of PTSD, reduced blood pressure. So the research, the scientific research, helps to validate whatever they haven't experienced as yet. So yes, the doubts are there, the research answers the doubts, and then we work with the students. And then their experience, what is it? Proof in the pudding. Proof in the pudding.
So Daiken, amongst the other issues, or maybe opportunities, you have a shaved head and you're wearing robes. So that communicates something different to your potential clients. So tell us about that.
True. We were sitting at a table at lunch, and Booker and I, and someone at the table said, "Oh, we're coming to the meditation thing." And Booker said, "Well, how did you know?" And I said, "Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain." Right. It's kind of interesting to, tell people I'm a Zen priest or to dress like this, which I do most of the time. For me, it's just a symbol. It's in our tradition when we ordain, we do shave our heads. Just as this kind of analogy to getting rid of desires, because desires are numerable as the hairs on one's head, and so we shave them all off, and therefore we have no desires. So, or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, if you all shave your head, you'll have no desires. And, no, it's just part of the ritual that we have, and many people grow their hair back, and I have a friend who has long hair and a beard now, and because he says I can't separate myself, I can't set myself aside as different. He's still a Zen priest. He still does baby blessings and marries people and does funerals and memorial services and talks to people one-on-one and leads his practice group and all that. And so it's more just kind of a personal choice for that expression. I advertise my group. I just, by word of mouth and I have a meetup.com group and different things, and so somebody walks through the door, and so they're interested and they're curious, and so for me I kind of I focus on that. So something led them to walk through the door, and so I encourage them to explore that, to see what that might be, and then also just have it be something very light. I would say at this point my practice is more Zen flavored than actual kind of like the ritual, somewhat more kind of stern Zen practice that is out there and that has kind of been part of the tradition. And as Emma Goldman said, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. So it should be, the idea is that it's community. Whatever the community is, it might be folks literally inside a house, all of the residents in one house, or all of the residents who get services from the same provider, or the larger community, or whoever. But it's basically just inviting people in and accepting them as they are, and just allowing them to experience whatever their experience is and support them in that search.
With the amount of government money that goes into most of the developments that folks fund here, is there any tension between the practice of that you're describing and any of the grant money or any of the government money that goes into the property?
So everything that's described is non-sectarian. And number two, as Sasha said, everything that's described is also evidence-based, and in fact, there's probably more science and study behind a lot of these practices than there are behind a lot of other techniques that are being used. And number three, we're seeing an enormous growth in government funding actually to explore this. So for example, the Garrison Institute has a program for teachers, and we have now finished three-year grants with federal funding from the Department of Education to actually study the benefits of this program called CARE, which is a specific meditation training for teachers working in inner city schools. And not only has the program, but anyway, so the government, the federal government and many other governments have been actually very supportive of this idea. I should plug in for that. The Garrison Institute is an hour away from here on the Garrison, New York. It's very easy to get to by train, and its website is www.garrisoninstitute.org, and it has all kinds of retreats and classes and courses on many different kinds of meditation, and it particularly focuses on the application of meditation and service workers, people doing this work in the world.
Work of John Kabat-Zinn, who essentially has taken meditation techniques from, I think it was maybe some forms of Buddhism, and just stripped away all the words that were religious and put it into a context of just practical mindfulness.
Yeah. And so, John Kabat-Zinn, who founded the MBSR, is actually, the initial work started as an investigation as to how they can make mindfulness secular. The 4 foundations of mindfulness are the foundation of Buddhism. And he literally teaches Dharma, but just without the words. In the work that we do, we talk a lot about self-regulation. We talk a lot about about resiliency. We speak a lot about anger management. Just to kind of follow up on the woman who asked a question in the back. So many of our kids go to anger management class, and they always say in anger management, they talk about anger management, but in meditation, we actually practice. So it's actually like an embodied thing as opposed to a cerebral thing. In my lineage, I've been saying insight, but it's the mindfulness, this mindfulness boom that we're in. That's actually the foundation of my practice. And so, there's magazines called mindfulness. There's TV shows called mindfulness. It's so mainstream now. When I started this work 12 years ago, and I said, who's practiced meditation or yoga? Silence. Now, my kids in jail, all of them, have had some experience, some exposure to yoga or meditation. And so it's not anything that's so out there anymore that people are not looking to fund. People are actually finding more money to implement into their organizations.
On the question of money, one of the things that I'd like to share as well is that we also have school programs. So I teach 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds. There are a lot of programs. There's a program in Brooklyn, a program in the Bronx. So it's the technique is it services a whole wide range of age groups and populations, but the students, as well as the veterans, as the DV community, the homeless community, they don't pay a cent. What we do, we form partnerships with an organization, and we try to, seek funding so that we can offer it to that population completely free of any cost. And that's a lifetime follow-up they have, free of any cost, so they can access any transcendental meditation teacher or center in the country and make an appointment and come in for meditation checking at any time.
Could you say a little more about how you've engaged folks to want to even try this? How you get to sort of invite people? And you say 100% of your folks have tried it at one point, but what kind of response have you been getting when you put it out that this is something they can try?
Are you speaking to me?
Or any of the, well, I'm thinking of people people incarcerated, but also homeless, people who are living in homeless residence.
So I didn't say 100%. I said there's been they've heard about it, they've been exposed to it somehow. Everyone wants to regulate, and the cycle of trauma is this dysregulation and attempt to regulate. So many of my kids, I hear often, after we finish meditation, they always say, man, it feels like I just smoked a joint, and I'm like, so I lean in, I'm like, so tell me what it's like to smoke a joint. And they say, so just take a moment and take a deep drag in and hold my breath for a moment and then just let it go. And I say, then how do you feel after that? I just feel so calm. And I'm like, you know what? That's exactly how it feels like when I meditate, except it's free, it's legal, And so I find that so many of our kids, they want to have the feeling, the sensation of what mindfulness can bring them. But when you live in a community that's under-resourced, you don't have meditation centers, you don't have healthy food stores, you don't have gyms, you don't have yoga studios, but you have a lot of liquor stores, you have a lot of fast food places to eat in, and anyone will sell you a joint on the street. It's just a matter of showing them that there is another way to get that same feeling. We all want to feel good, but it's a matter of what's accessible to me. And so it's just amazing to find that mutuality of oh yeah, we want that same thing, just to offer them another option.
I like to remind people that the historical Buddha on which all of these practices are based was a human being. He was a person, and he was just trying to figure out his life. He had, first part of his life was being raised with pretty much anything he wanted. People say he was a prince, but we don't really know. But the myth is that he basically didn't have need of anything. It was all provided for him. And he was very sheltered. And so then when he went out in the world, he saw old age and sickness and death. So those two things confused him, and he resolved to sit down until he figured that out, and he did. And the essence of his kind of insight was that most people lead this life of feeling off, feeling like something isn't quite right. And that the source of that is desire, and there's a way to end that. But he also talked about that most of our lives are conditioned, that from a very early age we get stuck in a rut because we brush our teeth the same, we walk to school the same way, everybody does the exact same things, and so we wind up missing a lot of this. There's that kind of somewhat snarky phrase, how's that working for you? You know, somebody comes to you and says, oh, this is happening and this is happening, and I'm doing this, but it still keeps happening. It's an opportunity for folks to see that there might be a different way. And it's basically kind of letting go of the side of the pool and just treading water for a while to see what might happen instead of struggling and fighting and all of that, and just be, and then possibly become aware of these rigid ideas we have, or this programmed behavior that we've learned. And once we're aware of that, then we are empowered. We have kind of we have the ability to choose whether we continue on with that.
From an organizational point of view, it's because of the valuable partnerships that the David Lynch Foundation has with SUS. I'd like to hail out, on friends in other organizations as well, that we've been able to do this work in a sustainable way. However, from a personal point of view, I can say that as a TM teacher, I found that I've worked with a variety of populations, and not just at-risk populations, but also those that are involved in corporate America. Educational institutions have taught TM in a whole range of situations, and I found honestly that those who experience trauma, you have sometimes nowhere else to go except deep within, so that pathway to that place of peace inside is sometimes familiar, because there's no peace on the outside. There's not even even on the inside, it's difficult. And so sometimes that place within, it's familiar, and maybe that's why the students that come and that maintain the practice, they come with a kind of an inner knowledge, perhaps, that there is this place that they can access. That's just my personal, feedback.
Dealing with trauma is a very, very complicated issue. And that one of the things we know is that there are many different kinds of trauma, and that you can unleash more problems sometimes by dealing with trauma incorrectly. There's some very interesting studies that show the benefit of the combination of meditation and cognitive behavioral therapy, which is we know cognitive behavioral therapy is very important for trauma. We know that people who are traumatized often are self-isolates, and that social network building is very, very important. We know that trauma is embodied, and so yoga or forms of body movement can be very, very helpful. But the point is that if you're dealing with traumatized and populations, you're dealing with people with homelessness, people with multiple issues, which most of you are, that meditation is a very helpful tool, but it's only one piece of the tool in the toolkit, and it is not a substitute for everything else too. We actually need to test it in combination with everything else. But also to think about it that it's not just for your population, but as you've heard all of us say, that it's for yourselves too.
And so I think it's really, it is so integral for us to incorporate all the modalities that we can, head up all the tools that we can in working with our clients. I want to invite anyone who's interested. The Lineage project is having a training at the end of July. I'm the director of trainings. And we talk about cultural competency. We talk about historical trauma. We talk about the trauma of racism. We go really, really deep into that because we found that was just such a huge missing piece that people tended to bypass. It's like, oh, I'll just teach meditation, it'll be great. I'll teach yoga, it'll be great. Not paying attention to what's actually happening historically in the person's body. So we're having a training, a 20-hour training the weekend of July 22nd through the 24th. I'm happy to give you information about that. And I'm also the founder of Urban Sangha Project, and we support the sustainability of frontline change makers. So I come into social service agencies and I work with the staff, offering workshops in yoga, meditation, compassionate dialogue to give you all a space to be together as a community and to just share and to practice and find new tools together as a community, not just separately and by yourselves.
Daiken, I really appreciate what you're saying about the community aspect, because I work with the Women's Initiative. I'm the Associate Director, and what we found teaching in the Family Justice Centers is that the women, as they learn the practice, they want to go through the process with other women. And the cohesion, the coherence, the power of meditating together, as you've experienced here today with, the beautiful sessions led by Booker and Daiken, it is a powerful experience because we're connecting on a level that is so deep, and that is our essential nature, beyond our name and form. We're connecting on that very elemental, deep, energetic level, and we're strengthening ourselves from that connection. So the group cohesion, the group practice of meditation, the group moving forward, group formations, we encourage that in the work that we do at the Family Justice Centers, and also in terms of, for example, in Brooklyn, the residential facilities where we've taught, we come and we check back in, we have group meditations, we keep on visiting to have that group, we're trying to maintain that group connectivity. It's very powerful for healing.
How many people in the room have populations that are on medication?
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things is that, as you know, one of our biggest issues in the work that we do is when people go off their meds. And they go off for many reasons, and one of the reasons is because they feel numbed or dulled, or there are many reasons why they don't. So one of the interesting things about meditation, and this really needs to be done in conjunction with a medical professional, but is that because literally it's changing the neural structure and the nature of the mind, which I showed earlier in the neuroscience part, you can often significantly reduce medication. There are cases in which people are able to go off meds, but think of it more as an ability to reduce the meds, so it's reducing the side effects so people are much more comfortable with it, and the meditation and the significantly reduced meds lead to a much more balanced population. But again, that is something that really needs to be done in conjunction with a medical professional. So with all that, you've been a fantastic and very, very attentive audience, and we thank you very, very much for it.